Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sacred Symbols Plus, your weekly Sacred Symbols supplement podcast. I'm your host, Dustin, and today is our Deathloop Spoilercast. Very exciting, very long in the making, we know, but we're here, we're doing it. It's time. I've got an awesome crew with me here. First of all, our boy, Rick Hogue, the lawyer expert, but not here for your expertise on any law right now.
Thank God.
For your expertise as a gamer.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for letting me talk about video games in this space. Deathloop, obviously one of those that has been very well received by a lot of folks, and I certainly have my own thoughts on it.
Heck yeah, dude. I mean, it's awesome for me to podcast with you, and you already we had to do a slight restart, so we're like doing the pretend thing where we say the same thing over again. But before I worked full-time for Last Stand Media, and I actually listened to gaming podcasts, one of them that I would pull up every once in a while was the Easy Allies podcast, and I would hear you on that. And in fact, I think it was Kyle had the segment Help Us Hogue.
Yep.
And so you have a legendary status in my mind from all of those shows. So to be here podcasting with you, it's an honor. It's great to have you working with us in official capacity.
Absolutely. So, well, Help Us Out, Hogue. Anybody being interested in what I had to say about these things, whether it was mergers and Xbox or elsewise, was certainly one of the things that led to virtual legality. So I appreciate it. I love the Easy Allies. And I loved getting to sponsor them for as long as I did. That was a lot of fun writing that stuff and talking to those guys about business things.
Yeah. So it's cool. It's cool to have you here, man. Thank you for making the time. Of course, we have the host of Defining Duke, Mr. Matty Plays. What's up, man?
Hello. Thank you for having me. Excited to talk a little Deathloop. Certainly, a lot of people were agreeing with my thoughts on it when I first reviewed the game. So excited to return to that, break it all down together as a group. And I'm curious what both of your gentlemen's thoughts are on this game, because I know I was on a bit of an island. So this is one I was really looking forward to. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem, man. It's good to be podcasting with you once again. We were talking before the show that we used to podcast together every week with Ham Radio, but there's, Ham Radio has been rebooted and I'm kind of off. I mean, you didn't kick me off.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Maybe it was low key and I didn't realize.
I absolutely did not kick you off. You are more than welcome to come back. I should make that clear. But
yeah, I got to come back at some point for a live one. That'd be fun.
Right.
But then I'd have to podcast with Paul.
Yeah.
And
he's doing great though. He's doing great.
Yeah, that's what I've heard that. Yeah. So awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive in to Deathloop. But real quick, if you're listening to this at release, you're already part of our Patreon, and we really, really appreciate that. It means a ton for your support. That's what keeps the lights on around here. It gets everybody paid a fair amount for their work. So we really appreciate that. And you may be listening to this on the public feed. Who knows how long later? Significantly later. We appreciate you guys also for checking out this content. If you could, subscribe to us on YouTube, give us good reviews on podcast services. We would appreciate that as well. But also consider patreon.com/laststandmedia, where you can get early access to, just an insane amount of content. Honestly, you've got Sacred Symbols, Defining Duke, Knockback, 2 episodes of Sacred Symbols Plus a week, Defining Duke Ultimate. There's just a cornucopia.
You will find
some
something
podcasts
for yourself.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, boys, let's get into Deathloop. And so I've solicited questions, comments from the audience. I gotta be honest, I was a little surprised by the overall tone of the comments overall.
I was
because,
too.
Well, Maddie, you, and I think this is I want to start general. This is usually what we do, is we start with like a general kind of aspect of it, and then we kind of get into the nitty gritty. But I feel like the tone around this game has shifted since release somewhat. Like, people were very hot on it around release, with a few outliers like yourself, Maddie. And then now I'm kind of seeing the conversation change a little bit. So, Maddie, I'll throw it to you first, because I feel like you've had to kind of defend yourself somewhat the last few weeks here. And do you maybe feel like there's some justification of some kind? Like, how are you feeling?
Yeah, a little vindicating to see the internet crumble. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, it's been interesting because for those who haven't been keeping up and are just listening to the spoiler-free section of this, really what happened was Deathloop came out to a ton of 10s, absurd amount of them. And I thought it was a solid game, but compared to the workload of Arkane with Prey, Dishonored, I found it quite underwhelming. And we'll get into the hows and whys of that. But yeah, as Dustin had alluded to, and of course, because I cover a lot of Xbox stuff on my channel, there was the slander that I was trying to just take down Arkane, which is now a first-party studio for Xbox, so I don't know why I would. But it was a lot of that, and I really wasn't worried because I felt very confident in that review when I put it out. I remember when Paul and I were reviewing it, we were talking off the air, and I was saying, like, yeah, there's no way this game's going to review well. Like, it's just so clearly worse than what they've done. I was shocked by what transpired afterwards, but I think it's just because of the way that they handled some of the mechanics in the game. So again, as I said, we'll get into it, but those are just some of my general feelings on the game and the review process for it.
Sure. So Rick, I don't know where you sit on this game at all. I know you've done content about it, but where do you think you lie? Just in that, we have Maddie, who one of the outlier. I wouldn't say your review, Maddie, was like completely negative, but it was definitely not positive.
It was critical for sure.
It was critical, yeah. So Rick, where are you at with Deathloop?
Yeah, so my background on this is I'm a big fan of Arkane. And that really stems primarily from the game Prey. I enjoyed Dishonored. I found that universe, while having good world building, a little difficult to grapple with. It never fully connected with me in a way that I loved. Prey was the exception. And Prey absolutely knocked my socks off from the moment I played it. Now that you can play it with all the Xbox bells and whistles, it's absolutely unbelievable on console. And Moon Crash, which was the DLC to Prey, one of my favorite DLCs ever made. And interestingly enough, for purposes of this discussion, Moon Crash is the clear progenitor to Deathloop. There are a lot of ideas and concepts that are broadened out, sometimes narrowed, moving from Moon Crash over to Deathloop. And so I was interested in it. I will be honest with you, I was a little over it in terms of the pre-marketing hype after State of Play number 12, where it was featured. I felt like I was in a Deathloop. So I wasn't certain I was going to buy it. And I have to be honest, I like to say generally I'm not convinced by reviews and things like that. When everybody starts throwing 10s at it, I'm like, well, all right, I'll put it in, I'll give it a spin. And my ultimate answer to this is actually very similar to Maddie's. It's not Prey to me, and it's significantly less than what is, in my opinion, their maximal output. And a lot of that has to do, for me, I have a tilt towards world building and storytelling, and that's all but non-existent. We can talk about the specifics when we get there. I think in terms of reviews, in terms of these things popping out the way they did, Deathloop has some great UI, some great ideas that I think if you're imaginative and you look at this and you say, oh, I can see how Deathloop 2 or the successor to Deathloop is going to absolutely blow people's lids at some point in time. They've made some really smart design choices. They've solved problems. I just don't think that what they did with that for this particular title is a 10 out of 10 kind of level. And that's where I stand on this. Good game, enjoyed my time with it, didn't blow my socks off.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty close to where I am with it as well. There's definitely some major disappointing aspects, and I think we're going to get into that very early on once we get into the spoiler mode of this show. But it's clear that Arkane's games are unique in their immersive sim aspect, their open-endedness, and unfortunately, they don't sell very well.
Right.
And it was clear to me that in some aspects, they were trying to make their games more friendly, more commercial friendly. But the weird part about this whole thing to me, guys, is that they somehow made it worse and better at the same time. And that's kind of my thing too, if someone's listening to this, just the beginning, to hear our overall thoughts is that the game is not as tricky as it seems at the beginning.
Right.
Because I've heard a lot of people tell me, whether it's on my stream or just tweets or whatever, that they're like, I'm so frustrated with this game. I'm like a few hours in. I have no idea how to do this. In fact, Colin and Chris on Sacred Symbols were talking about how they had no idea what was going on. And I'm like, okay, well, it's a bit of an illusion.
Yeah,
really.
Smoke and mirrors, big time.
Right. So, but overall, though, I think the thing that I enjoyed most about this game was it still had a really good moment-to-moment feel that I got from Dishonored, like being able to really strategically string together powers, pull off this maneuver or whatever, I thought was really fun. And I think that's what got me through the game wholly and made me really enjoy it. But the structure aspects, not so hot. And it's funny because it really does make you feel when it starts like, whoa, there's so many possibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
And when Maddie and I think it was one of the last ham radios, well, maybe not. I'm trying to remember, Maddie, when we talked about it, you were like, yeah, this game is not very open-ended. I was like, are you serious? Like, I didn't believe you almost.
I had a code and I had an extra one that they had given to me, and I gave it to you. And I think I said to you that, and I was like, yeah, it's not what I thought it was.
Yeah. So real quick, I guess to end off before we get into spoilers, right now the game just got discounted to $40. I think that if you are a fan of Arkane games, I think if you're a fan of Arkane games, no matter what, you will at least, in my opinion, enjoy this game if you know it's not quite what it seems. If you take it for what it is. At $40, I'm like, yeah, I think this game is worth it. Maddie, you're kind of where are you at? Like, what's your where are you at as far as recommendations on this game?
I remember my review, I said honestly around like $20 to $30. And again, that doesn't talk about the quality of the product, because there is something there that can be enjoyed. But when you really, again, I got to go back to sort of what Hogue was touching on. When you size up their previous games, and one of the things that Arkane does so well is replayability. I mean, Dishonored 2 is consistently slept on as one of the most replayable games. You've got 2 sets of powers, multiple endings, 2 different protagonists. They play completely differently. They can explore the levels differently. But no one really ever seemed to touch on that in their Deathloop reviews, on how that level of depth is completely missing. And some of the powers that we see in Deathloop really aren't even unique to its universe, like Shift is Blink. And it doesn't really beg you to use other powers, like Nexus is clearly overpowered in Deathloop, where you're going to just snap your fingers and kill everybody. And it makes stealth kind of a tedious task and less of an enjoyable thing. And so as that depth starts to thin out, I'm like, this isn't as replayable. It's not as fun as the prior Arkane games. So I'm like, wait till it's like $20. The reason I say that is because they have the Arkane collection for $20, where you can get Prey, both Dishonored games, and just everything they've done all in one package. And to me, I know that some will say, well, that's a value package because the games are old. But when I look at what has been offered previously and what they have now, it's just, I can't tell you even $40, just because I finished it in 10 hours really quickly, and I didn't rush or anything. It was just a short, compact game. And I think that's why, I don't want to get into a whole spiel in the press, but I think that's part of the reason it's done really well. I've seen a consistency now, like Metroid Prime, I thought was excellent, by the way. But a lot of the positive talking points were, it's a nice, compact 10-hour experience. And I think...
Oh, you mean Dread?
Yeah, did I say Prime?
You said Prime. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not trying to actually you, but I know that someone in the comment will be, he said Prime.
I need that, trust me.
Yeah.
Metroid Dread. Yeah, Metroid Dread. There was this whole conversation on it being a 10-hour game. I finished it just actually last night as we record this, and I finished it in 8 hours and 50 minutes. So it's a short game. And obviously that speaks to, the quality, and the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But there clearly is a gravitation for the press right now, with everyone getting a little bit older collectively, that they want these shorter games and they appreciate them more. So they're going to score higher. And I think that plays a big factor into it as well. But yeah, right now for me, general recommendation is at $30 max. That's where I did.
Hogue, where are you at?
I think
to kind of close out this.
I think that recommendation is the same as mine, which is what you would expect. hey, do you not have Moon Crash yet? Do these ideas sound attractive to you? Go get Moon Crash first. Go get the collection of things that they've done better because they are really shiny still. They have an art style that works well in 2021. You're not going to feel like you're missing out so much on playing Deathloop. If these kinds of ideas interest you, I think they have been done better by the very same company. And again, Moon Crash, very similar conceptually, but a lot more replayability, a lot more depth than Deathloop. And so that would be my recommendation, because there are issues, as I think Maddie pointed out, with powers, with getting into kind of ruts once you've got a solution. A lot of that stems from the fact that the AI isn't really existent in Deathloop. They said that it was a murder puzzle, and I agree with them. That's clearly what they built, but they built it so that you aren't really seeing enemies as, tricky things to fight so much as little cones in the road that you know what you're going to have to do at each specific spot, which can be fun. It's nothing to take away from. But if you're expecting AI and kind of deep shooting mechanics, they're not there. So don't get it for that. There are plenty of other games that can give you that experience if that's what you're looking for. But yeah, Deathloop to me is, if you've got everything else from Arkane, absolutely, $40, $30, something else. If you don't have everything else from Arkane, go get those. They're better than Deathloop.
I'd just like to add on with the AI. One interesting thing was a lot of people said that it was I don't want to specify who, but it was intentionally designed that way, that it was supposed to function that way. And while at first I gave it a little bit of like, maybe, then I saw a new patch come out for Deathloop, which the number one gameplay change was like adjusting the AI to react properly and to be more intelligent. So in my eyes, it was broken on that aspect at launch. They did recognize that internally, and they have now fixed that. So by the time people are listening, something like that may not be as relevant to you,
sure,
but just know it very much was when we were all playing the game.
Literally cones in the road. I mean, I was giving them credit for that. So that's an interesting kind of news item that they did change that, which is, I was thinking they wanted certainty in those responses to give you that puzzle feel that, hey, we're not going to do a ton against you. You're going to know what you need to do here. But if they did change that AI, I'll probably pop back in. It's been a little bit since I beat it. So
yeah,
that's
I
interesting.
personally didn't. I have no desire to, but
So yeah, let's go ahead. I think this is a good place to switch over to spoilers. So yeah, 17, we gave a little extra. So we can go ahead and switch over to spoilers and get into the real nitty gritty here. But I do want to make one comment, just because I know that this will come up. Our point isn't that some people, when we talk about, like we were talking about game length, it's like, is it worth it for 10 hours for a $60 game? Just to be clear, we're not talking about game length and price. We're talking about the quality of Deathloop mixed in with its length and its price, right? Because I know I can already hear those that feedback there. And it's like, yeah, we're talking about the quality of what we think the game is worth. So I just wanted that to be said real quick. So now, spoilers are on. If you don't want to hear about Deathloop and the ending, we suggest turning off this podcast and coming back later.
See ya.
See you later. Okay, so I have our document here structured in like a couple different like big topics for the game. It seems like one of the biggest things about this game, or one of the biggest issues, or something that people have a lot of different thoughts about, is the structure of the game itself. We actually got 2 write-ins. I'm going to read just one of them. The one, I think there was even more than these 2, but Paul S. wrote in and Rob H. I'm going to read Rob H. here. He says, "Hey gang, I really enjoyed Deathloop, but was kind of surprised how linear the story ended up being. The early game is marked by a sense of freedom with sandbox-style levels and multiple story threads to choose from. However, it eventually becomes clear that there is only one order you can kill all the targets to complete the story, and the game has been holding your hand to the exact time and place needed for each assassination. Instead of the final run testing your knowledge of the world and the repercussions of your actions, it is more just sticking to the script and following the big objective markers on the screen, the level select screen. How do you guys feel about your final loop and the story structure overall? Did your perception of the game change when you realized there was a man, parentheses, linear conclusion, behind the open world curtain?" So this is kind of what we were alluding to already, is the fact that there is just one set way to beat this game, and a game that's all about like looping over and over again, on killing all these visionaries, and it gives you this really strong sense of freedom right off the bat. And I remember the moment for me when I was looking in between. It was either in between loops or in between like a different section of the day, and I was like, oh, this is really just a checklist of things I have to do in order to finish the game. And so, Rick, I'll throw this over to you first, because sounds like we're all really big Arkane fans here. How did the story structure feel to you? Good, bad, or not as bad as you think, or how are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two things here, the second of which we can come back to if you want to. I'm a big guy on narrative, and I've got some really big problems in terms of how this is set up from the beginning to kind of compel you down its loop, and I don't think it's sufficient in that regard. But I think we're primarily talking about the gameplay here, and I think this is what's so frustrating with a game like Deathloop. And you can see the design solutions they've put forward and figured out and how this is all going to work in a different game, where you've got notions of when they tell you, oh, this person doesn't leave in the morning. That's something you're going to have to remember and plot out your own assassination structure to hit all these things, because there's going to be variables and multiple things that you'll have to handle. And instead, Deathloop almost feels like they don't trust you. Like they've built something that could be complicated and have all these moving parts and be this clockwork mechanism, but they're not quite sure that you're all going to get it. And so instead it's going to have to be this thing, and you're going to hit all these little boxes. You're going to get to the end of those lines, and you're going to see exactly what you have to do. And it is going to mark it on the map for you to do. And to me, that's really dissatisfying. You get to the end, and what you see is, oh, this was a linear campaign game where you broke it apart and you sprinkled it across what I could do kind of in any direction that I wanted, but like a Dragon Age or something else. Yes, you can pick which land you go to first, but we're all going to here. And I don't think that was what was sold. And more importantly to me, it's clear that the design problems they solved lead to something that is more satisfying, that is more interesting. And whether that's Deathloop 2 or somebody else saying, oh, those were some good ideas, I'm going to make one on my own. I'm very excited about the successor here, and I'm very happy that Arkane went through this process. But the product itself does leave me, at least, looking at it going, oh, it's the one way, and here we are at the end game.
Right. Yeah. Maddie, how are you feeling?
Yeah, when it comes to the time of day, for me, I think we all had a moment of awakening, it seems, since we're on the same page. For me, it was going after a particular target at a particular time of day. You find them in a warehouse. Let's say it was the afternoon. You kill them. You're like, okay, that was cool. That was its own little sandbox. As you're going around the level, you see all these different opportunities for like places that maybe that character could be next time. So I come back, it's that same character again, because you're looping the same day over and over. It's nighttime this time. They're in the same place doing the same thing. And that's when I started to realize these characters don't really go to different locations and do different activities. And it's very, as Hogue was saying, one track. So you're going to go through the same tunnel. You're going to crawl through the same levels, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys agree. I found them a lot smaller, like they were tighter. You could zip right across them in a heartbeat. And once you get there, you know how to get through that same location again. And I know what they were sort of going for. Like they were trying to connect the narrative with the gameplay, saying you're in a time loop. So of course you're going to start to know and familiarize yourself with the location. But I feel like you could still do that if they were living their lives and say in the afternoon they were over in this dock, but in the nighttime they were in the warehouse. And it's in the same map, but they had different things at different times of the day. I didn't encounter that.
And I want to, I just want to pin this for later. I think the size of the levels is a part of them dual making a single player and a multiplayer game. And I want to talk about that because I think they were hamstrung a little bit by that decision.
Yes, absolutely. What I had said that in my review too. So for me, it was the structure again. You saw it on paper. You saw the beginning. They're pounding you with tutorials, menus, like you could do this, that. I'm thinking to myself, holy smokes, this is going to be awesome when they let me off the chain. They let you off the chain, but little you know, they just tightened it a little bit more. They brought you a little bit closer. And again, you pick where you want to go, but it's not that level of freedom that was definitely spoken of in the marketing. And it definitely seemed that way in reviews. And I just think some people, the sad reality is I think a lot of people fell for the smoke and mirrors. They kind of bought into that illusion a little bit more. And I know there's always a huge debate on like choice is always an illusion in games, but I think there's a way to sort of even have real consequence of that. Even if we're all going to get to the same ending in Deathloop, about how you get there, that's the real story, right? Like, I didn't care that Deathloop story wasn't that great because I don't view Arkane as storytellers. My storytelling for an Arkane game is I went over here, I did this is how it unfolded, and you tell me you did something completely different to take out a target. I think that's where their true storytelling lies. And so when they sort of fell short on both fronts, I think there was a snowball effect, and things just gradually got worse from there.
Yeah. The thing that when early on in the game, like Maddie, you had mentioned, when you get let off the chain, I had this vision in my head where I was like, man, I bet you'll be able to figure out, because there's this party at the end.
Mm-hmm.
What if I could get, but like, let's say it's really difficult to do this, but it's possible. You can get every visionary in the room together.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can use the, is it Nexus? Is that the one that?
Yeah.
And then you could use Nexus and take them all out with one bullet. And it's really, really, really hard to do to set up that moment. But then once it's set up and you do it, you're like, holy shit, I pulled that off. That would be amazing.
Yes.
I was thinking about all of these possibilities that I was like, man, this is so awesome. And then it was literally the exact opposite of that. And
Right.
it's so unfortunate to me in the fact that, you know, I mentioned the idea of using Nexus, right? Is that they give you this amazing tool set of abilities and they let you play with it somewhat. In particular, I'm thinking of the level. You guys are going to have to help me refresh my memory. I have a really hard time remembering characters and stuff like that. There's the guy that he has the blink ability or the shift ability in this game. You pick it up from him. He's in like the weird like haunted house ride.
Yeah, the castle. That was Charles something, I believe.
Yeah. So I enjoyed going and killing him multiple times because I did figure out, I'm like, oh, there's multiple ways to do this. I can sneak in, of course. I could try to just kill everybody. And then you learn about his like computer brain that you can tell everyone to get out of the building.
Yep.
And that was kind of one of the more interesting ones. But like the other visionaries didn't necessarily have that kind of open-endedness. Like there's the one guy at the party who's like, you shut off his beer, or there's one other thing that I was like, man, this isn't quite as satisfying. So it's like, not only did I want a little more open-endedness in the overall structure of the game, but the individual deaths as well, I feel like didn't necessarily have that kind of depth to it, you know?
Agreed completely. Yeah, it was disappointing because I think part of it was, for me, hurt by playing Hitman 3. I'm sure the Last Stand audience is pretty familiar with my feelings on it, but for those who aren't, I really, really, really liked Hitman 3. I mean, you want to talk about a murder puzzle with a lot of options on how you can approach it, that game is it.
Dude,
there are
the
a lot
manor,
of
dude.
Yeah, right. There's just a lot of, because the game shows
level.
what you're supposed to do with something like that. There's a lot of guided ways you can do it, like in that manor level where you can follow the butler and do this investigation side quest, if you will. But there's also a lot of more open-ended ways, like shooting the lady into the grave or whatever. And, you know, I don't want to directly compare it because I think a lot of games pale in comparison to Hitman 3, but I just think the reality is when you look at that game, I feel like either, again, this is a product of the industry and how it is, where a lot of the press just, it came out in January, we're just going to forget about that one. Either they forgot or they didn't play it, because a lot of things Deathloop tries to do comes up short in comparison. And they're kind of the same game trying the same thing, just the only difference is one's pretending you're in like a bunch of different parts of the day and tons of things are changing when they're really not. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys is if you felt when you were exploring the levels that there wasn't as much interiors, like there was a couple less windows you could open, buildings you could crawl through. Because one of my favorite things about Dishonored and Prey was going into places, picking up little trinkets. There were more interactables, things that you could read and mess with. I felt like this game had considerably less. And since you both really like Arkane, maybe it was just me being nitpicky, but did you have a similar feeling with that?
Well, you know, to me, I think the biggest feeling that I had on the environments themselves is that they were a little bit more artificial, and I could see the puppet master behind the scenes a little bit more. I like to give myself over to the designers on these kinds of things. And of course, you're going to be designing vent passageways and how these things are going to interact and what flow they're going to have on a fundamental level. I looked at these particular areas, maybe because of their size, maybe because of their art, and we can certainly talk about that if you're interested. But I looked at them as essentially artificial. You could kind of see, all right, these are the pathways. Here's how the side path works. Here's how all this works together. And then we sprinkled some 60s stuff, some prisoner stuff, some no one lives forever stuff in various ways that didn't make a ton of sense to me as a livable environment. So I think if you want to give credit to Prey or Dishonored, part of the illusion is looking at a space and being like, okay, that's how that conference room would work on Prey's space station and how this would all work together. And so I don't necessarily think about how these kinds of things make it so that there's 3 different pathways through a mission or something along those lines. When you add to that artificiality, when it just looks to me like you dump some stuff here, some of it's cool, but it's all just kind of thrown on this island in a way that I can't fully see how it works. My brain behind the scenes starts going, all right, what were the developers doing? And then I see the paths a little bit more. And I think that created a sense of artificiality in playing the game for me, which winds up, maybe it's not less than the average Dishonored level, but I think it's far more visible.
Right. I feel like for me with the environments, my biggest issue, and Maddie, you mentioned this in your review, so I know you're on the same page as me, and I bet you Rick is too, in that there was a lot of times that I had a light bulb moment and I was like, oh, watch this. And I was, because the environment almost in certain ways was like, it felt like it was hinting at like, oh, you can do this. Nope, you can't. And don't get me wrong, there were moments where the environmental clues did show you things like Rick, you mentioned like different vent tunnels and stuff like that. There is some of that in this game, but I don't know if it was just in comparison to Dishonored 2. There were multiple moments where I'm like, I really feel like I should be able to do this, and I just simply can't. And that, I mean, man, that's a frustrating feeling when you're playing a game that touts itself on that moment to moment gameplay like that, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I had that. It's funny you brought up, I just double checked, it was Charles, by the way, Charles Montague, I believe is how you say his name.
Right, yeah.
Charlie, yeah.
He his section was the only part in that game where I felt you could have that watch this moment. And I'm sure there will be members of the audience who disagree and have had their own experiences, but for me personally, that was the part of the game that begged the most exploration, that scaled with your ability. So you could get upgrades for your slabs and everything. And so at one point your shift can reach a little bit further. So at one point to take out Charles, Dustin, you had mentioned like you can send them all out of the location, or you can climb up the side. And so for me, what I did was go around back and I shifted up through the castle walls, completely avoided that whole maze that you could go through the first time. And I just came up behind him, stabbed him. That was it. And I was like, that was cool, because I was able to, through good level design, because they considered the powers then and later in the game, I was able to approach this in a new way with that same set of knowledge that had been developing because of the way the game is structured. But I just feel like there wasn't enough of those moments there because, again, it's number one, those targets, those visionaries, they're not moving. And 2, that the level design is limited. And Hogue, you had alluded to it. You think it's because of the multiplayer aspect.
I do.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead. We can jump over into that right now. We got Alexis Anya writes in, howdy, boys. How did you guys think about the invasion mechanic? I enjoyed it, but overall it was pretty broken. Killing invaders would let you get abilities early, and it was an easy way to get money for infusion. And I also have another write-in just to kind of open up our mind about this. Jeff Caceres says, what's up, yo? I always applaud any developer that implements a PvP mode into their game in a unique way that makes sense to the game. Watch Dogs did it with their invasion hacking mode, and the Souls games also have something similar. Deathloop got a huge plus from me for having an invasion mode, and in my opinion, makes the game even better. I played the game in the online mode the whole time and encountered many different types of Julianas. Sneaky Juliana, rushing Juliana, sniping Juliana, and other types. I got killed in such a clever way one time, it put a smile on my face, and I just couldn't be mad about it. In my opinion, playing with it in single-player mode made her super boring, especially with the AI being so easy. It added an extra layer of challenge to the game. We need more of this because Battle Royale is whack. Did you guys play it with it on or off? Would love to hear what you think. Keep it up. Love y'all. So, yeah, It's interesting reading these questions and already kind of lightly discussing the invasion aspect, because I feel very mixed on it, like very mixed. And that is like some real strong highs, kind of what Jeff was talking about, where you will have this really awesome one-on-one kind of Dark Souls style gameplay for a little bit. And then, man, when it's the AI, it is so incredibly bad. I had moments where I was like, is the AI even working? Is it even doing anything?
Yeah.
And other times where it was just like really, even with other players, I was like, what is going on here? So Rick, I want to throw this to you first, just in the fact that you posed something I had never even thought of, the idea that you feel like that the multiplayer influenced the level design. I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the various areas on the island, I think it's pretty clear that the city is the biggest, right? And if you've ever been invaded or done some invading on the city map, you know that there can be this kind of stalemate where the other party is just being very quiet and isn't throwing up any of the smoke signals that you'd otherwise want to see. And it's the worst. It's the worst experience. There's so many places you can be on that specific map. And I really think the invasion mechanic shows how, I don't know whether that was the first design. I don't know whether they just like that city map the best, but it works so much better on the other three because they're so much more tightly designed. There's only so many places that you can be. You've got sight lines to almost every area on the map, and it works a lot better there. And I think it drove the design into a place where you do get these kind of small little levels that, in order to still provide fun opportunities, have to have everything kind of crammed together, have that sprinkling of art, feel artificial. And I really feel, in order to encourage that invasion mechanic and to make it fun in most instances, they went away from the city design, which is significantly bigger, and into the other three areas. And I really do think it influenced things. And I want to say, first of all, your audience is clearly much better than me. I lose more to Juliana than they do, clearly. And certainly I've had that instance where it was very frustrating, where I felt like the Juliana was too good, or I couldn't handle it. And I had just gotten, I don't know, a slab and a cool weapon or whatever. And you have that moment where it's like, well, that was a terrible experience. But certainly when it's working, I agree. There are highs there. It's pretty fantastic when you're in a cat and mouse and you feel evenly matched and you're figuring things out, and it can work out. But I wouldn't give up what I would hope for from better world building design, something that feels less artificial in the single player, solely for that experience. And that's kind of a reasonable minds may differ kind of situation. If you really love it, then maybe it's worth it to you. I think it did affect the design. I think it affected it negatively for what I enjoy in games, which is immersing myself in those areas. And that's why I would get rid of it. But I certainly understand why it's there. I think it does its job. It does what it says on the tin at certain times, but it certainly can be frustrating as well.
Yeah. It sucks because Juliana, on a story level, I think is probably the best part of it all, when you learn her relationship with Colt. And
that's the best twist.
Yeah, right. And you get to the end, you're like, okay, this is interesting. And I felt like the ending was a little rushed, but it sucks because it kind of mars what I think is probably the better part of the game. And so with her, I had done both online and offline with the AI. I thought that when you got into that sort of cat and mouse, as Hogue said, where you're crawling around the level and you guys are kind of encountering each other and running away, there's a level of intensity there that can only be accomplished through Deathloop, and it gives it a sense of identity. But most times I encountered, at least, and this is kind of the issue of multiplayer, is you might now run into people who are much more methodical and stealthy, where for me, I was running into people sprinting at me. So it was just like, boom, boom, done. Okay, cool.
Right.
Thanks for the free stuff. Moving on. Progression's been accelerated now. And maybe they had to balance that, fine tune that a little bit more. But for me, it became a nuisance. And I thought, well, let me try it on Juliana's side. I beat the game. Let me just hunt down some players now. I know these levels like the back of my hand. This could be a cool thing. And you can see they tried to make a progression out of it. And I'm like, what are they doing, man? I know some people think I'm just complaining for the sake of complaining, but it just seems so far off from what Arkane needed to do to make their games relevant and sell better, that they've put this kind of PS3, Xbox 360 era multiplayer idea with progression in it, where it's like you can unlock new weapons and slabs and all this stuff, and you hop in, you kill someone, it's over. And I'm just like, okay, that was that. And you don't feel as much of the impact I feel going in from the other side. You just know you're probably fucking with someone. Whereas being on the receiving end, it's a little too hit and miss, where I don't know if it was an idea they could have committed to. What I would have rather had is, I do think of Dark Souls, like one of our write-ins said, where I still get a little nervous when I see one of those CPU invaders come in, because there's a level of perfection to them, but they're well designed in my honest opinion. And if I would see that on the occasion and know that it was this unpredictable CPU that would be stalking me through the level, but it wasn't going to, for example, lag my game a little bit when it started up. There was that's probably been fixed now, but there were server issues. I just feel like that would have been a better approach, because I don't know if the online connectivity, as we're suggesting, really just shrunk down how the levels are made. And if they did it through a CPU or an NPC, sorry, it would have been better. But I would have rather that and had them focus all their resources on making this more replayable single player game.
I think that's totally fair. One of the big things for me too, just and then we'll move on, because man, this episode's flying by. I want to make sure we get to all these topics. Is that one of the main things for me with multiplayer when I was trying to play as Juliana is the matchmaking was really slow.
Really slow,
and,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like, and I don't know if this is just a matter of, I mean, you'd imagine that there's a lot of people playing single player and less people trying to be Juliana, and so it would be pretty quick. But I don't know. I was sometimes waiting like 5 minutes plus in matchmaking, which was just a little surprising. Who knows? Maybe that's something that they can sort out or have sorted out since release, but that was a big thing. Let's move over to talking about some of the abilities in this game. Evan Barr writes in, "Greeting, gentle sirs. I want to focus on the powers of Deathloop. Did you, like me, rely on only one or two powers to get you through the entire experience? Or did you experiment with different powers to get through the game? Personally, I never came across a situation that Shift and Nexus couldn't get me out of. And unless I was going to get out of my way to obtain the relevant trophies, I never wanted to use the other powers. Keep on keeping on, my dudes." And I just quickly wanted to reference Trent Sinning wrote in, and he also talked about powers, but his main thing was that you could only equip 2 powers at a time, which I also noticed as well. So, Maddie, how are you feeling about the powers? Because I know for me, I was just like Evan. I used Shift and Nexus the entire game. And the few times that I did experiment, I was like, damn, I should have used Shift and Nexus, because it would have been a lot more helpful.
It's exactly that. I was just looking at my phone for a sec, because I was like, let me refresh myself on some of the abilities, because I did mess around with them. But as seems common with our audience and us, I fell into the rhythm as well of Shift and Nexus, because what would happen is you would get something like Havoc, which it would increase your damage, and it would be like, okay, this is good for if I'm in a gunfight. But you try to run and gun, and you'd use Havoc, and you think to yourself, like always, like, Shift and Nexus is better. It's more effective. And what happens is, it's kind of like, it's going to sound obscure and a weird fit for the conversation, but it reminds me of how I feel about like Devil May Cry 5's combat system. It's like, okay, we've got this great, beautiful looking combat system that you get the SSS at the end of a great combo, but there's no real reason for me to string these together if my goal is just to beat the enemy, right? So you're just, in my opinion, just kind of swinging away doing these combos just to be flashy. And that's kind of what I felt with Deathloop's abilities. It's, yes, I could run and gun, I guess, but there's no more effective way than stealthing with Shift and Nexus and calling it a day. And maybe that's just how our brains work. We're looking for efficiency here, but I just felt that it was also the most fun. And that's, again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I enjoyed attaching Nexus to 5 people, taking one shot, and they all dropped. That was consistently satisfying. And there was no other power in the game that really, to me, offered that, even when you upgraded them. You know, you'd keep taking out the visionaries, you keep upgrading the powers. I actually thought that was a good loop. I liked that idea. But there was no compelling reason for me to do that. And I think it's because the arsenal really felt limited. If they had more stealth abilities, I mean, you look at what Dishonored 1 even boasted. That was something else, especially at its time. And I feel like the fact that this game only had a small set of like 6, 7, somewhere around there, was really underwhelming, where even if you wanted to experiment, your experimentation would end really quickly. You sort of got your answers fast, which, funny enough, is kind of how I felt about the story. But I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Rick, how are you feeling about the powers? Are you on the shift Nexus train like Maddie and I?
I'm honestly not. I
Oh.
don't roll with
Okay.
shift for the most part, but I did roll with Nexus, and I paired it with I think you said it's Havoc. For whatever reason, I was thinking of it as Rage. I like to have a stealth power and let's just fight it out power at the same time. So I mostly did it with those two, and it might have been partly because I think a couple of Julianas dropped a few in that direction. And so I was just working with what I had at the strongest levels. And Nexus was Nexus to me is the obvious choice for virtually every circumstance in that game. So that one's always going to take up a slot. And then, I just didn't use Shift, which in my head I was thinking of as Blink. So that tells you about how those powers work. I did instead use the Havoc because it does increase your damage. It also decreases your incoming. It's really the I want to stand here and slug it out of powers. So I had both. And certainly the latter, the Havoc, worked pretty well on a run and gutting Juliana. If they're going to come in at you, they're not really expecting you to pop that, and they go down pretty good.
Yeah. I know that for me also, I don't know, maybe this would break the game, but with Dishonored, and I don't know, I feel like it's fair to compare this game to Dishonored regularly because it takes so much from it. I mean, Blink and Shift are the exact same power.
Yep,
so there's a lot of the same DNA, but I was feeling regularly like, man, I wish I had a couple more powers at the same time. Even if it's like an end game unlock to be able to carry more than 2 powers, that would have been much appreciated. Just because I feel like it really could have opened up some more of the creative aspects of the gameplay. But
you even could have done a few more fun things with the perks, I think. I mean, you get that right from off with the double jump concept. And they didn't really do that much with those.
Dude, the thing is with some of these, with the powers and the perks, is that I often put mine into different traversal based things.
Sure.
And once you put on double jump, you're never taking it off. That's how I felt. Like I was like, I can never not have double jump on now that I've put it on. Like I've grown too used to it.
You do. You do a run where you're like, that 4th slot, maybe I could use something else for it. And then you run out into the level, and I don't know if you're like me, but I immediately accidentally jump into like an ice flow because I think I have the double jump and I just fall over. So you do get used to it. I think it's why it's one of those that's in the onboarding process. Like you get it always. And I would have loved to have seen them do weirder stuff with those. But again, I think there's an overall trepidation in the design here from letting you get too far off the guardrails. Whether that's the way they've structured the entirety of the campaign or whether it's just small things like that. I think you can see it throughout.
Right. Definitely. Let's talk about the story, boys. So
we're done. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to condense. We had a write-in from Jason Vanover. He talked pretty positively about the gameplay and the visuals clicking for him. I'm going to shorten this down just for the sake of time about his comment on the story. He said, I spent 20 plus hours playing the game, reading nearly every document and exploring all of the visual storytelling the game presented. And although I have somewhat of a basic understanding of what they were trying to do with the story, I do not think I could write an intelligible synopsis as to what the fuck Deathloop is even about. Visionaries this, Aeon program that, huh? I truly can't remember having such a contrasting opinion of a game where the enjoyment of the story and the gameplay go in the opposite directions the more I play. Moreover, when I finally got to the end and had the brief encounter with Juliana and reached the credits, I was so beyond let down. Describing the ending as lackluster would be beyond an understatement. That said, I still had a blast and stand by it being my game of the year. Strong words here.
Nice.
So, I really feel like I agree with Jason here, and that I didn't read. I mean, initially I thought, well, I didn't dive as much into a lot of the stuff you can read, the documents or whatever. And I'm like, that's the reason why I don't really understand what's going on in this story. Well, Jason here argues that even if you do read a lot of that stuff, the story is a bit too vague. And Hogue, I see you nodding along pretty strongly here. So are you in agreement here? The story is a bit maybe too out there?
So, I mean, a couple of things here. I think I mentioned as part of this talk already, if you're going to put me on a side of bias or tilt, it's going to be on narrative. I live in the world of role-playing games. I play a lot of these games for story. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy other kinds of things. But when you're going to say, hey, we're going to tell a time travel looping storyline with potential references to alternate dimensions and copies of people and all this stuff, I'm like, all right, well, you've bit off a lot. Let's see what you got. And at the end of the day, I don't think Arkane had much. They had what I would describe as a love of Lost, a concept that there's a history on an island. And I think they did some good flavoring. You had some nice seasoning around about people having dealt with this island and its issues before. And you had earlier programs and visits to the island from military bases. You had a kind of nice layering of different eras on the island. I like all of that conceptually. They didn't really go anywhere with it. They didn't tell separate stories with it. And my biggest issue, and this is an issue that is not solely Deathloops, this is with a lot of video games, I would say, is one of the real keys to a good narrative structure to me is that inciting event. If you're going to ask somebody to play something for, we call 10 hours a short video game, and that's not wrong. That's a lot of time in the real world, right? That's a full Netflix series. That's a couple of movies. You can watch Dune 3 times in that period of time.
Worth it.
If you're dealing with that kind of time frame, you need something that launches you forward. And I've found that video games that have that can actually get goodwill for a long period of time from me, up to 5, 6, 7 hours even in, if I've got that nice launching point. And Deathloop just kind of starts. And even as you get towards the end, I don't know that I ever really had a good answer in my head for why am I going on this murder spree? Even when you get to the end of this game that says, hey, you've always wanted to break this loop, and people are telling you things about their relationship to you and why this matters. I'm still looking at this and saying, all right, so they're all crazy. They're all visionaries. They're all weird. They're hedonists. They're on this island. They're doing this stuff. Why? Why am I delivering my lines so angrily? Why am I going on this murder puzzle, other than the fact that that's what I bought the game for? And I don't think that there's a satisfying answer even when you get to the end. But certainly if you think about those first 5, 6, 7 hours where you're going through the motions, you're checking off those boxes, you're killing these people. Yeah, they're jerks on IM or whatever you wind up reading on the computers. I don't think I got a great feel for why this is happening. They're bad guys that want immortality. I get it, but I would have had a different framework from the start. I thought it was interesting that it turned out that Colt was one of the visionaries, and you learn that very early on. But I was thinking about this as I'm playing it. What's wrong with this and the way I feel? And I was thinking, well, it might have worked better if he was from the outside. If you had some kind of even pedestrian plot line that says, well, this island is slowly opening a black hole and might eat all of the earth. We're sending in, Colt, our best, to go figure out what's wrong and give some impetus behind all that. Because as far as I'm concerned, you show up and you're told you need to murder people either by Juliana or by the words on the screen telling you from past Colts. And I don't feel like I had a good understanding of why, really, after the whole game was over, but certainly for all of the hours where I should be engaged with what it's trying to tell me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, very well said. There's so many answers that you had or that you wanted to have that they give you really early on. That was my biggest problem with the story. That may sound weird to some, but what happens is you learn very quickly, as Hogue had stated, Colt's one of the visionaries. You're like, well, why do we want to kill them? Or why are they on this island? They're like, oh, the world outside is bad, so we want to stay in here. It's like, okay. What is this Aeon program? And they loosely give you answers on that. And you're thinking like, okay, that's something that'll slowly develop. And there's a couple of threads set up like Colt and Juliana's relationship. What's going on there? And you learn within like 2 hours, like, oh, she's my daughter. And once they give you those answers, there's no further development. They just give you a set of answers and then it just kind of stumbles along. And you get to the ending and it's like, yeah, you left mom. And it's actually like you've been stuck in this operation for years and you were leading it at one point, or you were like the head of security for it. And now you're not, and you're trying to break out of it. I don't know. It's just one of those things where you felt very scatterbrained by the end of it, and not in a good way. Like you finish BioShock Infinite and you go, whoa, there's so much possibilities here. It was you finish Deathloop and you go, what? It was that, as I believe it was Jeff who wrote in, or Jason, sorry, the moment. And it just ends before it really has told you anything. And I think, again, Hogan put it brilliantly, which is that there needed to be something before to sort of color the reasoning why these visionaries were behaving this way, because the text logs, the terminals didn't do enough. I thought it was really cool they made information progression in Deathloop, where they were like, hey, you're collecting data on people and learning where they are and what they're doing, what they're up to and why they're here. And that is your way of moving the story along rather than just chasing quests. But it eventually devolves into that, as we've already discussed. But I thought that there was something novel there. But beyond that, I just felt like it was really, really, really disappointing how it all unfolded at the end of the day. And I think if you knew what the world was like before then, or they give you even a visualization of that, you could understand why people are in here, and it would have made it feel a little more grand when you had decided to end the loop or maybe continue it.
Right. It's the thing about the story for me is that it's been a few weeks now since I finished the game, and it's funny. I don't know if it has something to do with like, I just feel like I don't even remember anything that happened because it did not even make much of an impression.
It all happens very in the background, right? So I don't blame you.
Right. And dude, especially the ending. We had a couple people write in about how we felt specifically about the ending, the choice to break the loop or continue it, which I felt like that choice was just so weird. I'm like, that's the whole point of the game, is to in every
you've
trailer.
Been told that, right?
Yeah.
I'm here to break the loop, and you don't
Colt's
get
like,
much
break
better.
This fucking loop over and over, every state of play. Break this fucking loop. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna break the fucking loop at the end of the game. That's what I'm gonna do. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I don't know. I meant to look up the end, like watch on YouTube the ending if you don't break the loop, just because I was mildly curious, and then I just forgot.
My Kopi, Paul, co-host of Ham Radio Live, had done it. He said it wasn't like that crazy. Yeah, there were like I don't think there was much missed if you didn't see it.
Right.
But admittedly, I have not seen it myself either.
And it's trying to be edgy at the end. You gotta kill yourself. It's got the kind of stuff that you're expecting from these kinds of games, I would say. But truthfully, if this is probably the best place where it matches up with the original BioShock, in my opinion. Fantastic game, super great environments, just kind of ends if you go back and you look at that original game. And that's the same kind of impression you get. It's like, oh, well, I guess I did that final loop and the game's over. And I think it really does lack narratively from both the inciting event throughout. That it's very difficult to imagine what that could look like that would be super satisfying at the end. In all honesty, you have to kind of pay those debts to get up to a place where you're going to have a great ending. And so I don't know that they could have done a lot differently there, because I didn't have much feeling for anything by the time you arrive at those final scenes.
Yeah, definitely.
It doesn't really leave room for a sequel either. If you shut down the loop, it's like, well, what's the next Deathloop, right? Like, it seems like a very much a standalone thing that was trying to tell like one specific story, where I felt like it was almost like you have one shot, you've got to do it right this time. You cannot mess up the story here, because I think just stretching it out, I think gameplay wise, we've all agreed that like, yeah, I would love to see these ideas evolve, but I don't know if the Deathloop universe can actually uphold all of that.
Well, I think the name's broad enough that you could apply it to a completely different scenario.
That's fair.
But Deathloop 2 is a loop in a Martian base that also is dealing with an interdimensional demon invasion, for instance. I mean, that hasn't been done in games.
Sure.
So
sounds like you've thought about
could have
this.
that kind of situation. Yeah.
It's interesting just thinking back on the chat we've had for almost an hour now. I don't know if you guys feel this way. I just, I feel like we've been very critical of this game, and hopefully people feel like we've been very fair. But at least for me, the way I feel about this game as a whole is that I loved Dishonored 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Prey.
Yeah, I'm not hearing enough Prey love there.
Yeah, I'm not big on Prey. I've tried. I've really tried. Maddie, actually, that was the thing when we were doing Ham together. I put like probably 8 to 10 hours into Prey, and the whole time I was waiting for that click. But either way, I say overall, Arkane is a studio that the three of us have an immense amount of respect for. It's a studio we really, really love. And so I hope it comes off that like we're very critical because we know what this studio is capable of. And
yeah, we're not mad. We're disappointed.
And here's what I will say. There are so many nuggets in this game of like really neat ideas, ways they've advanced some of their formula. It just didn't come together in the right way in this one. And so, we hopefully the next one, they can take some of this feedback, and I mean, not from us, but maybe they're listening. Hey, what's up? But
hey, let's pause there, because this was one of my favorite Twitter interactions that I've seen all year. And I can tell this story, man, but I'm happy for you to do it. You're the one that had the interaction.
I mean, I'm curious what it looked like from the outside, but I remember just like waking up and seeing, I think I saw your quote tweet in my mentions, Hogue, and I was like, what's he talking about? And I see in response to my reply to Deathloop's reviews, and people were really at first grilling me, and I effectively said, jokingly by quoting Conor McGregor, I was like, I don't really care. Like, I'm not going to give you a 10 or whatever by just because others are. Like, you'll get my review. I don't care what other people have to say. I don't say it to be standoffish. I just, if I'm worried about what other reviewers are going to score games, I'm not much of a reviewer. It's just that simple. And then I did that stupid Conor McGregor quote, not thinking anyone from Arkane was going to give a fuck what I had to say. And in comes the game director, Dinga Bakava, who headed up Deathloop, and he said he found the review valuable. And to me, that spoke a lot to, number one, the characters the character of the studio, rather, at Arkane. I always thought they were good people. I've interacted with them before with like Prey when I went to a press event. But to actually get that, where, by the way, this game's swimming in tens.
Yes. So for
him to come to Mr. Individual YouTuber who's very critical of the game and be like, I liked your review and we found it valuable here at the team. I was like, that was really a moment I'll always remember, because I was, as a individual YouTuber, it's not like I'm an outlet. I'm not verified on Twitter. I don't drag a lot of attention. I think of these companies, I'm just a voice in the crowd effectively, maybe a little bit louder than some, but I don't think I demand a certain amount of attention where I don't get those interactions often, especially ones where I'm critical and it's met with something pretty positive, where I've always respected Arkane, but that just kind of raised the bar where I was like, okay, they're listening at least and not saying, well, we got 10s. So, we're good. We don't need his opinion. It's like, okay, they're still trying to see how they can improve. And I thought that was a really positive sign. Does that mean they're going to look at my review and craft the game around it? No, but they listened, and that's all you can ask for. It's the point of a review. It's not just for the consumers, it's for the team.
Yeah. And if you don't know, if you're not on it, Twitter is where hope goes to die. All right. And watching this interaction of essentially someone that was critiqued pretty forcefully say, look, I find value in that. That's how we learn. We have so many eyeballs on this for years that we only see what we see. It's useful to get a third party, and it's useful to get somebody that says, oh, you could have done this better, even if we don't agree, right? It wasn't saying, oh, we're going to do whatever Maddie tells us to do. It was, there's usefulness in that. And it's somebody that, sells shirts that says reasonable minds can differ. It was just fantastic. And I love that. And I want to echo the message that was said here, which is, I am most critical about things that there's something worth loving about, that are almost frustrating in how close I feel they came to something that I could have really shouted from the mountaintops. And I think Deathloop is brilliant in how they solved some of this stuff. I heard mention of information being the valuable that you go and get that advances your game. Fantastic. You'll see other games use that. This whole looping concept, you will see other games use. What is essentially hinted at when they're onboarding you through the 600 menus at what the game could be, that is something that is going to go forward from here. They cracked a lot of the code here, and that's going to benefit the entire gaming industry. And I'm thrilled that they're making money and they're getting their 10s, because they did a lot of work here. I just don't love the product as much as some other people. So yeah, when you hear me critique these kinds of things, in fact, I just said this when I was doing a postmortem on Dune, which I loved, but it's an hour of me talking about the things I don't like, right? And it's like, well, if you don't know me, when you get to the end of this, it's because I love it that I go so far as to have these conversations. And there's a lot to see in Deathloop in the future. That's why you see me go, it's a 7 to me, but a 9 is just over that hill. I'm looking forward to the sequel.
Yeah,
definitely. I think that was beautifully put, Rick. And I mean, we're at an hour now. I had a couple other questions here, but I feel like this is worth kind of ending it off here, unless there's any other final thoughts you guys wanted to bring, whether it's particular moments or critiques or anything we didn't cover. Just last chance.
I feel like we hit on everything here. Just, shout out to Arkane. I still think they're the best talent beneath Bethesda, where even their, I put this in quotes, in my opinion, most underwhelming game, worst game, was still decent, right? Like, they didn't have a flop out here. And I think what was good about this spoiler cast review discussion is you could tell really by each time we start our sentence that it was coming from a place of love. It was not like, fuck this sucks. It was clearly a, man, this game's almost got it. Not to just echo what Hoke said, but it really was, to me, truly disappointing. It was probably the most disappointing game I played this year, but not in the typical sense. Like, that's usually got a negative connotation, but it's more so like, you were like a hair away, man, like in just a couple of different areas. But I hope that's as easy for them to implement in another game. Because what's interesting is coming up is Redfall. And that's going to be something completely different as well. We're talking open world 4-player co-op. So I don't think, obviously, the lessons learned from Deathloop will be applied to a game that's apparently coming out summer next year. But I am keen on seeing how Arkane's experiments pay off here, because after Redfall is where they're going to sort of be at a fork in the road on where they want to go. They'll see the player count, the numbers, the sales. And with Deathloop and Redfall under their belts, I think they'll decide if they want to go Deathloop, which is, let's be honest, once you take away the smoke and mirrors, a lot more streamlined, or maybe more open world and co-op, which is popular nowadays, especially in Game Pass. I think that'll be very telling. So while I love them, I'm also a little cautious for their future, because I feel like they may just take the route of like, hey, we've spent 2 decades now making games that are really good that no one's playing. It's not enough for us to make a good game. So that's my closing thought, is it'll be very interesting to see where this company goes in the future.
Definitely, for sure. I want to just, since it's last chance to say anything, shout out to the level. Again, I can't remember any character names, where there's the girl that's in the bunker that if you alert, she sets it to self-destruct.
Oh, yeah.
I know that it was frustrating, but when I discovered there was a way to turn off the machine, well, first of all, it was really satisfying, like getting good at sneaking in and killing her without anyone knowing. But then when I figured out there was a way to turn off the machine, I was like, oh, this is pretty satisfying. I like that level. I know a lot of people were really frustrated that it would just like totally break your loop if that machine went off. But I had a lot of fun with that. So
absolutely.
Some good ideas. Absolutely.
All right. So that's it for our Deathloop spoiler cast. Thanks, everybody, so much for listening. Thank you guys to my excellent co-hosts here, Maddie and Rick. Real quick, guys. Rick, where can people check you out? What's going on?
Yeah, well, as you know, since I just was talking about Twitter, you can definitely find me at Hoglaw on Twitter. I'm on there too much, probably, for what's healthy. Talking about video games, of course, law, business, and my Michigan Wolverines, who are still undefeated as of right now. Maybe not when this goes live. We'll see how that works out. But also, I think predominantly I'm known for Virtual Legality, which is my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Hoglaw, where we do talk about business and law related to pop culture, primarily video games, where the video game industry really never stops giving me news items to talk about, whether it is mergers and messaging, whether it's lawsuits, either in the antitrust or more sensitive areas, as Activision Blizzard has been showing us now for a number of months. I'm talking about those almost every day on YouTube. So if you like that, check us out, Virtual Legality. I think we have a lot of fun there.
Definitely. And of course, also, you're the first official contributor.
That's right.
For Last Stand Media, which is awesome. We love having you as part of the team. And
yeah, I think I'm averaging 3 or 4 appearances now with y'all, and you guys give me the opportunity to not just talk about mergers and lawsuits and dive deep into design of Deathloop. And so I'm very appreciative of that. And I love being here. So thanks for having me again.
No problem. And of course, Mr. Matty Plays. The name is the advertisement in itself for your YouTube. You've also got retro Rebound, not replay.
Yes.
I almost said retro replay. That's
I've
something else.
actually off camera have called it retro replay a multitude of times, more times than I should admit. But yeah, retro rebound. I would appreciate anyone checking that out. That's the new retro channel. We upload every Monday and Thursday. Been cranking along on that. And then yeah, as Dustin said, Mr. Matty Plays. You can go and check that out. You already know what you're getting there if you're familiar with the Last Stand Media content. Otherwise, hope you all
And
enjoy.
Defining Duke.
And Defining Duke, of
course, very important there. The only thing I have to plug, if you're watching the video, of course, we got Last Stand merch. There's new merch at the day of recording. We have new merch in the shop that I'm very, very excited about. That's laststandmedia.shop. If you want to get this hoodie or, one of our many other products, check it out. And of course, check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia for you free feed folks out there. We'll be back next time with another episode of Sacred Symbols Plus. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and see you later.
Peace out.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.